Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Allison Hurrier, and I head up the Textile Arts curriculum at Portland State University. For those of you who are joining us from outside the university this evening, the Textile Arts curriculum is an elective track in the BFA Art Practice program that provides an interdisciplinary approach to the study of clothing and textiles. We offer courses in weaving, surface design, sewn construction, and dress history that encourage students to develop portfolios for a variety of applications in apparel, costume, textiles, and contemporary art. This is one of several free public events that we're hosting this term, where we bring in outside perspectives to supplement our current course offerings. Please feel free to visit our website or to subscribe to our newsletter to stay posted on some of our upcoming events. We hope that you can join us next week when we're going to have Anne Greenwood, Lila Rowan, and Lou Bain join us from the Icelandic Textile Center to discuss their residency that they're doing there and their upcoming work at PSU. But this evening, we are so excited to be hosting Andrea as a guest in our sewn construction class, which is taught by the amazing Jay Alford. So before we begin tonight and I turn things over to Andrea and Jay, I would like to acknowledge that we are joining you all from Portland State University, which is located near the heart of downtown Portland, Oregon, and Multnomah County. We honor the indigenous people whose traditional and ancestral homelands we stand on, the Multnomah, Katlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala bands of Chinook, the Tualatin Kayapuyya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River Valley. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jay.
Great, thank you, Allison. And thank you, Andrea, for being here this evening with us. I've invited Andrea to speak in conjunction with my sewn construction class, who are many of you here. Currently working on a patchworking project, and patchworking is a method of working that Andrea employs in really thoughtful and exciting ways. I really admire how she plays with pattern, color, line, and breaking out of the kind of rectangle or square patchworked form. And I've become familiar with her work through local exhibitions, and I find it just so compelling. And I know it'll be inspiring for my students and hopefully for everyone here today. Andrea Alonge is a Portland-based artist who works with fabric. She received her MFA in fiber from Cranbrook Academy of Art in 2015. And her BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2013. She blends tactile textiles and craft media with elemental shapes and symbols to illustrate the connections, relationships, and exchanges between individuals and their inner and outer environments in the physical and digital world. The maximalist surfaces of her textiles highlight the complexities, both hidden and on display, in each of us, while also highlighting the underlying obsession with and glorification of work in a capitalist society. Each piece holds the dual marks of industrialism that touch every level of communication and manufacturing, the mark of the hand and the mark of the machine. So welcome, Andrea. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate getting to speak tonight.
So we are going to do tonight just a little bit differently maybe than some artist talks that you've been to. We were thinking just to mix it up and make it a little bit more fun, that we were going to use Andrea's website kind of as a PowerPoint tonight, and then navigate through it and just have a really kind of free-flowing discussion as we move through the evening. And we are encouraging students or just anybody who's joining us tonight to go ahead and type questions that you have in the chat as we're going. We will get to them in real time and answer them like as we're going, as opposed to at the end. So with that, one of the things that when Andrea and I met last week and we're talking about this presentation, I was, one of the questions I had is like, is there one piece of work or one work that like we absolutely have to get to? And Andrea immediately said The Beach Within Me was like one that that we had to talk about because it was something that was really sort of seminal to your practice. And so we'll start there this evening. Andrea, do you want to tell us about this piece and why it's so important to you?
Sure. Yeah. So this piece was one of the first that I made when the pandemic started. I know we all remember how dire and scary things seemed. And also, so much of that was due in part to the fact that we couldn't connect in person, and we sort of had to shift immediately to online spaces or ways we couldn't touch. So in thinking about that, and sort of trying to, work through that in my work, which is something that I tend to do. I'm not somebody who when traumatic things happen, I freeze. Like that's the moment when I am in my studio working through those things. So when that happened, I started thinking about my connections with others being important, but also that I really needed to start to think about connecting with myself. So when I was starting to sort of spiral out, like how could I find the still center? And I started thinking about an experience I had. I was working at a job a few years ago, and there was a regular client who would come in and ask me how I was doing. And at first, I was giving her the prescribed, like, everything's great, how are you? The plain, the sort of less than authentic service. But and finally getting to know her one day, she asked me how I was, and I said, I really wish I was at the beach. And she said to me, Andrea, the beach is within you. And I thought about that a lot. We started saying it to each other. She would come in, how are you doing? Well, the beach is within me, I guess. And so when the pandemic happened, I started thinking about that a little bit more. It's like, right, the beach, I need to find my beach. It's within me, the center. And I found this, I was at Scrap, which is one of my favorite places to go hunt for materials. And I found this awful striped terry cloth. And I was like, okay, this is the thing. And this piece is the first time I'd been drawing with pre-printed patterns and using quilting techniques to form a line and use as a mark making tool. And I started thinking about like how I could really hone in on that and make it more. So for this one, it took quite a bit of math. I had to figure out how big the repeat was, figure out how many fans were in the Dresden plate, how many petals, and then figure out exactly the measurements so that they would line up and connect to the repeat on the other side. And as a result, you get this kind of pixelated almost like spiral view. And then of course I had to make it even more challenging by tying, 1,000 little knots. So that is kind of how I started thinking about this piece and how I executed it.
Yeah, you mentioned coming across the terry cloth and it sort of inspiring how to move forward. Could you speak a little bit about that part of your process, like how much the materials inspire the piece versus planning out the piece and finding the right things to accomplish it, kind of thing?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of a balance. I'm a Libra and it's a balance. and usually the material, it starts with that. It's I find something and it reminds me of an object, or it reminds me of the pattern makes me think of, a brick wall, or, I really like the certain stripe and I think, okay, I could really draw with this in an interesting way. And then from there, I start to think about form and what that shape of that work will be. And then it kind of, it goes from there. I figure out part of the form. It's cool, great, done. And then I'm like, okay, well, what's going to go with this? And so I have a really large collection of materials. I've been collecting things for a really long time. Usually, something catches my eye and I'm like, okay, I'll use that eventually. And often I'll hold on to things for years and years at a time. And then finally, when I'm making my work, or when I have one of those days where I'm like, okay, this is the day, I pull everything out, I dig through the bins, I start to put things together that look nice together, or that I think go in a weird way or have some kind of association that makes sense to me. And then I get myself a pile, everything goes back, and then I go from there. And then the piece sort of takes the form that it needs to take. I've been working a lot with particular symbols. You know, the spiral is a big one that shows up in my work a lot. And I feel like a lot of the fabrics I've been working with or collecting kind of further some of those symbolic shapes a little bit. And so that's been another sort of place for me to build.
It's interesting that this comes out like during the pandemic too. I mean, it feels like both the shape in terms of like what you're creating and the process by which you're creating it. I mean, it feels like you're referencing sort of this like meditation and this kind of ritual sort of, you know, semblance of ritual, both in the actual making and then the actual output of the thing. And so it's certainly a place I think that a lot of people got to during that time. So for sure.
Yeah.
Let's maybe move on to another one that you mentioned that really was something that you were excited about. This one I think was Sometimes When We Touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about this one?
Yeah, so in speaking to Jay's prior question about material, this one actually came from that main brick fabric in the middle. I had found this piece of fabric, this upholstery fabric. It was a remnant from my time at the fabric store, and I really loved it. And started thinking, okay, I need to make a brick wall. And I had all of these other brick pattern fabrics, so I was playing with appliques. And then I was also thinking about what I could do with cutting out some of those spaces and using a little bit of relief or making it more sculptural. And I knew I wanted some rainbows pouring out. I had this great rainbow squiggle fabric that I really wanted to try to draw lines with. And I really liked the graphic lines of the black and white fabrics. So I started thinking about how they could blend into one another, and I wanted them to sort of weave together. So I used rickrack to achieve that. Every piece that I make has a little technical trick that I want to explore. So that one that you're currently on, I was kind of thinking about how I could connect using the shape of the squiggle, but actually have the fabric weave together. So that was my little technical trick. I used to try a lot of different things in one piece, but since grad school, I've slowed down a little bit and realized that it's better for me to focus on one or two techniques in each piece so I can figure out what's working. And then when I was thinking about the wall and things kind of pouring out and touching and going back in, I started thinking about Midsummer Night's Dream. There's in Midsummer Night's Dream, there's a play that's sort of a play within a play, and it's the play of Pyramus and Thisbe, which is actually a Greek play. And in that story, Pyramus and Thisbe are neighbors whose parents forbid them to wed, and they're separated by this wall. And they start to talk to each other through a crack in the wall, and then they fall in love. And it's kind of a tragic story in the end, but I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just like thinking about that moment of connection. To me, that relates to the figurative ways that we form connections with each other. We have to kind of reach through our walls and the walls of other people to touch and form that relationship. The idea of connection through a barrier is one that I was really appreciative of. And I made this piece before the pandemic, but after I started thinking about it more too, like how connecting online can be also a metaphor for this too. How do we connect through a screen, or how do we reach one another using the power of our minds? so that's something I was thinking about with this work as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, this one was so fascinating to me. And I didn't actually notice the date until like well after like I'd started really looking at it for a while. And I thought that I was like, oh, obviously this must have been something that was created during the pandemic. Because it just, I mean, I feel like there's such an interesting kind of conversation about like interior and exterior space. And like, I don't know, I mean, when I was looking at it, it was reminding me like of how things were in New York, where like people were like literally connecting like out of their windows and things like that. And it's just, I don't know, like that was just something that I really like read into it. I know for this one, I was just so curious. So the brick, you said were both of the brick fabrics found, like the small one and the big one, or did you actually like manipulate any of those?
No, I found all of them and put them together, but they were found at different times. You know, I'd kept things for a long time and then finally figured out what the use was for them. I did manipulate them through surface embellishment. So they're appliqued on top of one another. They are, I'm not sure if you can see the detail from this as well, but they're all outlined with this kind of like neon yellow bright thread.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and then the holes cut out, you know, I was binding each one. And this one kind of, you know, when I'm thinking about connections and, you know, yes, like during the pandemic, we were physically separated, but I also think about the way that we connect with other people. Like you can never really fully know another person because your insides and your outsides don't sync up in that same way. And as somebody who has social anxiety, like that's something that I think about a lot. Like how do I share without oversharing, or you know, where do we draw the exterior and the interior lines and why? So
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting thing about this piece where it is referencing like architectural form of a building and of brick really directly. I'm curious. I guess I'm like thinking about your other work and I'm like, I don't know if you are referencing those types of forms very regularly or not, but I think there is that really effective, like, yeah, rendering of interior and exterior through these like, yeah, very architectural forms, which is interesting.
I've been doing more work with boxes and wells. Like I've been thinking a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the architectural elements that carry
Yeah.
information or flow, or, you know, the internet is a series of tubes, like all of those sort of functional elements that allow us to exchange things or to have things move from one area to another.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of started, like the first piece that I did that was kind of like this is called In 1 Year, and that one's one of the earlier works. And I think that that sort of started me off. I'm going to have a couple of well pipe forms coming up in my my show in July. And then I did use a lot of those types of forms for the Facebook, or the project that I did for Facebook Open Arts. So it's something that I kind of, I go back and forth with, I guess. Like, yeah, there's like a few different themes that show up a lot in my work. There's like these symbols. I really like optical illusions. I've been looking a lot at optical illusions and those kinds of forms where we can sort of look at them and see one thing, but they're actually another. And then I also really like organic shapes or natural shapes, like working with natural patterns, I guess. Lots of floral patterns show up in my work.
Well, that's like a segue, yeah, into what Maddie's asking about, like shapes and yeah, like the organic and sort of natural world influences of your work. We can also, if you want, Andrea, we can bounce around to anything if there's a different one that addresses that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to look at, there's a piece called In the Rays of a Beautiful Sun. And that one I also made in the midst of the pandemic. It's right near the top.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then, yeah, I think that's probably the most recent one. I will have a couple of floral pieces, thank you, that are going to show up in my show as well. I would say I'm inspired by the natural world. When I lived in Seattle, I moved to Portland in 2019. When I lived in Seattle, it was probably one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been or lived. You know, rainbows all the time, flowers everywhere. Like coming from the Midwest back to the Pacific Northwest, and being in Seattle specifically was really really wonderful for me at the time. And Portland has had so many of those things to offer as well. I also love the floral fabric. That is something that I collect. I've been collecting this vintage fabric for a long time, and I loved it so much that this piece, it was kind of my technical trick, was realizing that so many of the fabrics that I'm drawn to are sort of similar to one another, and how can I collage them on top of each other so you can't tell where one ends or one begins. It's like a field of flowers kind of pouring out. This piece was a little bit about the pandemic, and like, it's going to be okay, like we're going to make it through, you know. It was kind of right as the vaccines were getting released, and we were starting to be able to see a little bit of hope at the end of the tunnel. So
Oh, that was what I was going to ask you. So these are all different, like if we were to get closer, these are just different like applique, different patterns and things that are all applique on top of each other. That's so
yeah,
cool.
so I ended up cutting up a bunch of these different vintage fabrics and then appliquing them on top of one another. And you know, some of the pieces are like the size of a quarter and other pieces are a little bit larger. And I decided I was going to, I like to create kind of like rules or challenges for myself when I'm making the work. So for each one of these, I had to use one fabric as a background and the others applique on top. So each background is different, and then all of the appliques are the other fabrics. So there's a question here. So there are a couple of questions. Is this the one medium that you stick with? Yeah, you know, at this point it is. I actually started off my art education with ceramics. I did a lot of ceramic pieces, and I actually made ceramics all the way through grad school. But I feel really drawn to the tactility of fabric, and I know that clay is tactile as well. But to me, textiles are sort of an equal playing field, you know, like you don't need a lot of space to make something out of textiles. You don't need specialized equipment necessarily. You know, you can do it with your hands. And that to me, like, I don't need a kiln. I don't need a special electrical plug. Like there's all these sort of restrictions for clay that made it challenging for me to do them in my space after grad school. And so, yeah, I think textiles are the place I tend to stick with. I mean, if you look at the work, a lot of it has different elements that aren't necessarily textile elements. I use, you know, weird party tinsel and, you know, beads and mesh tubing and all kinds of stuff that isn't necessarily straight up, you know, associated with textiles. But I think that that's something that I am really drawn to. And I feel like this is kind of where my work is going now. Most of my work made out of found objects. Do you ever create original designs on fabric? You know, that's actually a question that I've been asked for kind of a long time. And to be honest, I don't have a whole lot of interest in creating my own designs on fabric. And here's why. I feel like the pre-printed textiles connect me to the global textile world. There's the people who manufacture the textiles, or the history that those textiles carry, if they're a vintage fabric, or they are connected to a specific culture. And by that, I am thinking of like the culture that I kind of grew up in. My parents were really religious, and my mom would buy a lot of that like pre-made fabric that you would make, baby quilts out of, or clothes out of, or whatever. And so I think that the history of the pre-printed textiles, or the associations that you make with those textiles, are inherent and important in the work. And I actually don't feel like me adding, my own patterns really does something for me in a more important way. Also, I will just say, like, I suck at drawing. I use it as a means to an end, but I have never been somebody who has been good at drawing or and I feel like taking digital imagery, there are so many people who are already doing that and doing it in such a better and more interesting way than I ever would. So I stick with the things I can find.
I have a question related to that. So I'm curious because like I actually completely understand your reasonings for why you would want to like work with found things, because of all of the inherent meaning and whatnot in them. But do you not, for instance, when I look at this piece, do you not like consider like the act of like collaging these things together, or like essentially like creating these kinds of patterns, that's not drawing? Like it feels like to me you are drawing, but you're drawing with like the fabric swaths.
Yeah,
like.
and I feel like that to me is the most important or fun part of the work. Is, I've never been good at drawing in a two-dimensional way, but construction, and I think of this almost as 3D drawing, or drawing in 3D, has always been something I've loved. I've always made more interesting choices and more interesting decisions when I'm working kind of with materials that are already there. I will also say that one of my major rules is that fabrics, or any kind of like textile that I use, should never just show up in the piece unmeddled with. Like I always want to have my own mark on that. That's me adding and being in conversation with these materials. And so I don't tend to use things, straight out of the package, as it were. Like there always has to be some sort of intervention that takes place while I'm making the work, for it to be interesting for me.
Krista was asking, so we were talking about patterns and designs, but what about like specific like textures, or the actual like content of the textiles that you're looking at? Because you also, like you were saying, you incorporate a lot of different things, whether it's like tinsel or like pom-poms or things like that. Does that come into play in terms of those selection processes? And hopefully, Krista, that was what you were asking.
Yeah, I mean, I love, fur, and I really like having an amalgamation of different textures together. I think that's kind of the important part. I also really like when I find things that are, really gross, and then they become more than the sum of their parts when they're placed next to something else. Like I feel like that juxtaposition between like, shiny costume fabric and like, a gross terry cloth towel or something, like those juxtapositions to make something beautiful by way of association, I think is really lovely.
Is there a piece we could look at that does that?
Yeah, let's see. I would say probably touching from a distance, I think actually would be a good one. Or also, actually, which one we should look at is you can see the stars in all directions. We can see the stars in all directions. It's 2 from the bottom.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so for this one, I found this this really awful 80s stripe, and I just thought it was it was amazing, but also disgusting. It was like very 80s or 90s, and it was some kind of like home textile. But when I separated it as its own stripe, I just thought, wow, how beautiful. And putting it next to that velvet with all of the, sequins and sparkles, for me, really made that fabric just so much better than it was. And sort of thinking about how I can use these things in a way that just makes them, I don't know, not gross. Yeah.
Oh, it totally transcends the material, like what they are, which is so cool. Like if you, yeah, I mean, I can imagine running into this fabric and not, I mean, it's totally different than from what it actually is. But then also, like, you can kind of go back, like it does. It's still there though a little bit.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's I think the lovely part. I mean, whenever I've been looking at these works, it's like you have a relationship with them, like as a in sort of a totality, and then you've got this other relationship with like this kind of other sort of more deeper tactile relationship and deeper sort of level of meaning when you actually get into like the things itself. So
yeah. Challenges I face with my process. Well, I guess one of the things that I see as a little bit of a challenge, but in a positive way, is I never really want to use the same mark twice. I always want to use things, like if I use a specific fabric, I want to use it in a different way in another piece if I use it at all. So often having like all of these different material sources come together can be a little bit of a challenge when you're like, oh, but this would look really good. But it's an interesting way to sort of like think about like, okay, well, I use that tool in my toolbox, like I can't use that anymore. One of the things I really want from my work is I feel like sometimes there's a pitfall in abstraction where you can make lots of works and they end up, even though they're different and they're different because you've worked on them, when you look at them in a space, they seem like they're all the same, like they read in the same sorts of ways. And that's something that I really try to avoid. That's a part of my process that I'm very focused on. Like they should talk to each other, they should be siblings, but they shouldn't be twins. And that's something I find that's really interesting. Are most of my pieces intended to be hung on the wall? These works, yes, are mostly hung on the wall. I have made soft sculpture in the past, and I'm actually considering making some sculptural work for this show that I have coming up in July. And I haven't worked in that way for a while, but I'm kind of excited about it actually. So sort of thinking about how to use the ceiling. I also feel like there's something about having things, when I work on a piece, it's not hanging on the wall, it's horizontal. There's a great essay, and of course I can't remember who read it at this moment, but talking about ways of looking and how textile work is actually meant to be looked at from eye down to the table, because so many of the textiles that we have come into contact with are, in sort of the space of the home. And I'm interested in that connection to domesticity. I don't necessarily feel like this work connects to that, like in a except maybe in an implicit or subtle way. And I have been thinking about like, what would it be if I displayed a work on a pedestal? If I built a really big pedestal and had it at a level where you had to sort of bend down and look at it. Initially, when I made that, the beach piece, that's how I was thinking of displaying it. It made more sense in the end to hang it on the wall, so it was right at eye level and you could kind of disappear right into the center. But I'm not ruling it out. That's certainly something I'm interested in working through, though I haven't done it yet.
Allison, you're muted.
Did you have any? Yeah, if I'm ever muted, Jay, you can just pop in too.
I was going to say, I appreciated the question of the challenges you have in your work, and particularly appreciated your answer of your answer was really like the ways that you challenge yourself in your work, and the ways that you kind of keep pushing yourself to be really rigorous, and inventive and coming up with new things, which I think is such a just a good model for to see the way it works. So I really appreciate you speaking to those methods of working and the kind of rules and challenges that you create for yourself and how you use those to push your work. So I just want to say thanks. I think that's great.
Yeah, I feel like that's really that's the fundamental piece of all of our practices. Like, you need to figure out the thing that works for you, and then how to keep from painting yourself into a corner, but do that in a creative way. Like, we set the boundaries and the rules for our own work. That is what we do. And then once we make it, then there are, questions and challenges to the concepts or the processes, or, why we make what we make, or, why we did what we did. But I think that those are questions that we should be asking ourselves the whole time we're making the work, so that we can answer them appropriately. Yeah, that's why I think critique is so important. I will just say, I think critique is really critical for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reflection piece is so important for sure. Allison, what were you going to jump in with?
Oh, since we were talking about just kind of like the way things are displayed, I thought that this might be a good one to just kind of jump into, because this is a more recent work, and it really, I think, in a lot of ways, granted, while things are on the wall, it's like you're dealing with like, form in this kind of architectural sense of like having these multifaceted room spaces and whatnot, where like the work is almost like crawling around it in a way. And so I just wanted to talk about this piece and just kind of what it is and where it exists. And we did have a question also from Leah earlier. Maybe you can hit that in this piece about just color palettes, and if it's something that you really like enjoy working with. So yeah, I'll just click through these, and you can let me know if I should stop or.
Yeah, so as far as color palette, I tend to be drawn to bright colors or shiny things, or I really like the vintage, those 70s colors, like that brown, orange, yellow. I would say I love most colors. I don't, except for purple. I don't really like purple very much, which is weird. It has to be like just the right purple. But yeah, I generally tend to kind of fall in love with one thing, and then find other things that make, a good relationship with that piece. This piece is, it's actually the first real and permanent installation I've made. I've done some installation work before, but this particular work offered some interesting puzzles to solve while I was making it. So Facebook Open Arts, when they were Facebook Open Arts, now they are Meta Open Arts, reached out to me last year in May, just after I'd had my solo show at From Typhoon in Seattle, and asked me if I wanted to create an installation for their employee headquarters in Bellevue in Washington. And I said yes. I thought that was a really interesting challenge. This is what I spent all of last year making. I installed it in November. And it was an interesting way to sort of think about how my work could connect all to each other, right? So I had been used to making discrete pieces that were singular, or maybe they had, a buddy, like a diptych kind of a situation. But Facebook was like, no, we really want it to be, it has to be like a mural. Like they need to not be separate pieces on the wall. So I said, okay. I will say that they were super supportive the entire time. I had written a proposal and drawn, a little schematic of what I thought I was going to do. And they did not hold me to that. I was able to make changes and think about, different ways I wanted to have things connect. And that was really fun. Is it hard to come up with titles? Actually, what's really interesting? So for me is the titles are not so hard. Like I am always listening to music while I'm making the work, and I feel really connected to music. And I'm not necessarily basing the work on a particular song or anything like that, but often the titles will come from lyrics to a song. So that's what this piece is kind of referring to. I was thinking about Facebook and the the positive and the negative ways that it allows people to connect, right? Like the people at Facebook are really wonderful, and they have such an amazing optimism for what Facebook is and can be. And I wanted to reflect that in this work. But obviously, there are some ways that we connect that maybe aren't so positive. And I wanted to sort of have a little nod to that. And I was thinking about that Pat Benatar song, "We Belong Together," whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong together. And actually all over Facebook, their motto during the pandemic on all their marketing materials and stuff is "better together." And so that sort of made me think, okay, all right, this is a good sort of tongue-in-cheek title for it that sort of addresses a little bit of those things. And also, using things like the chain and sort of how we're chained together through the web, or chained to our online identities, right? Like how we sort of end up carrying those things that we've posted online or said online with us, for better or for worse. And yeah, so actually this piece was really fun to make. I was able to hire a studio assistant, which was awesome. They also got me some specialized equipment, which was great. It was a chance for me to kind of push myself and figure out what I can do. So I made all this work in about 5 months, and had a full-time job on top of it. So yeah, so I kind of started with some individual forms and did some drawings, and then I had a friend who is an interior designer and put all of the work into CAD for me and laid it out architecturally. I was really interested in flow and exchange of energy. I was thinking about the internet as a series of tubes, or social media as these ways we connect. And so there are a lot of those types of like flows of energy. Also, when they talked to me about the different spaces that were available, they asked me if I wanted, something that was more like a flat wall, or if I was interested in things like convex or concave corners. And I really did. I wanted doorways. I wanted, these little corners to kind of move around in the work. And I really liked that opportunity to get to use the actual space and make it site specific. How much did they pay? Enough. I made almost as much from my art this year as I did from my full-time job. So that's cool. Thumbs up. I think it's different for everyone depending on what medium you're using and how big the space is. So I hesitate to just like put a number out there and be like, you should ask for this much. I will say it was a negotiation, and it was really nice and a really positive process for me. Actually, the curator for Meta Open Arts initially gave me, an estimate of the size of space I would have. And I made my proposal. And after I had done my proposal, she came back to me and said, "This is a little low, actually." like we can do better than this. And that was helpful because I wasn't sure how much to price something like this. But when I was thinking about the number of pieces that were in the installation and I was thinking about the size, I started sort of pricing it the way that I would price individual pieces, so do with
Do you
that what you will.
Yeah, and I think that's so. Every once in a while, you do get these like really awesome kind of commission opportunities that are with like a more kind of bigger entity or whatnot that are
Yeah.
really exciting. But I mean, I guess I wonder like so because a lot of the folks here tonight are students and they're just kind of thinking about like how do I get my work out in the world or like what like how do I even start the process of like becoming Andrea if that was what I wanted to do. Do you have any advice or like are there things that you would have told yourself like your like undergraduate self in terms of thinking about like starting off and moving into the world and creating this kind of work?
Well, I feel like social media is a really important an important piece now. I feel like without having my work in an online space, like through my website and on Instagram, I would not have had the same kinds of opportunities that I've had. I've had a lot of people reach out to me about buying work or doing an interview or curating a show through social media. And that's how they found my work. So I would say that's a big part of that. I would also say that applying to certain group shows is really helpful. I think you don't necessarily want to apply for every single one. I think that gets prohibitively expensive, but there are some that you have a minimal fee or a sliding scale, and that can be really helpful if you're a student and you aren't, able to just send off $200 worth of application fees for different shows. I think that's really helpful, and that gives you a space to start showing work and start building an exhibition record. I think that's really key. The other thing that I have found throughout the trajectory, especially here in Portland, is making friends and just getting to know people. I was given a solo show in Seattle with a gallery up there because even though my show at Carnation, I had a solo show in 2020, and because of the pandemic, it was not super well attended. And I know because I sat for every single weekend except for one day when these folks came in and saw my work and then ended up really liking it. So you never know what's going to happen. Usually it's just like, one connection is all it takes, and having a good community to show your work in or show your work with is really helpful also. So
we are like getting towards the end of our time together. Are there projects that we should be looking at or like things that we want to make sure we hit before the end?
Well, I mean, I could show you the work that I have right now at Well.
Sure, yeah.
I'm currently a member of Well Projects, which is in the same complex as Oregon Contemporary. So if anybody's been to Oregon Contemporary, the gallery is right near there. And this is something that it's probably the newest work that I've actually finished. I'm working on a new body of work for my solo show in July, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon. So I'm trying to make quite a few things, but this is actually finished and you can go and see it in person if you want to. I think actually that's one of the things that I find really interesting about making textiles in a world where so much of the art is digital. Like there is a totally different experience through a screen than there is in person. And I like that there's something that can be, taken from the work in each area or each venue. The work is going to read differently on a screen than it does in person. And I feel like that's sort of a nice metaphor too for how all of us are online as well, or interact online. Like we're all, what you see on social media is one thing and what you see in person is sort of another. And that's kind of the interesting part about being humans in the world right now. So.
Well, I know oh, go ahead, Jay. Jay, go ahead.
Oh, I guess I was just gonna say, I'm curious, how much you think about that when you're actually making the work and making decisions about the work, like how it's going to look on screen versus in person. And I feel like, especially with textiles, there's quite a different experience when you're able to be physically present with the work. And I'm just curious about that.
I think a lot about the macro and the micro view of things when I'm making the work. On a screen, you're mostly going to see things from a macro point of view. Like you can't take in those little details. Even in a detail shot, I think it's a different experience, you know. Also, I feel like our brains do this sort of tactile, like we can, I don't know, feel what a work is going to feel like, and when we're looking at it in person. And when we're on a screen, everything is flat. Like it just becomes a little bit less textured or bright. And so I think, when I'm making the work, I often like to give the viewer little treats, like for, when you see it in person, there are these little moments that I think are just, like a little reward for spending time or looking close. And I feel also like making work that I know is going to be experienced usually first on a screen is kind of an interesting thing that I've had to sort of puzzle out when I am using little tiny stripes for things. That's going to translate in a really strange way on a screen. There is a interference in the way that it translates in a pixelated form. And I honestly kind of have been leaning into that a little bit, or enjoying that aspect of things. I mean, it's one of the reasons I've been researching optical illusions a lot and sort of thinking about how to like pump up that effect. How do I make that more of a, I don't know, a feature, something that's meant to be there.
I appreciate hearing from you about that. Just as someone who thinks so much about presence, both in the digital and physical realms, I think that's an interesting thing to know. Allison, what were you going to jump in?
Oh, just, I guess I've been, there was like something on NPR recently that I was reading or like listening to, where it was talking about awe and how do we like experience the sort of awe basically, or this feeling of awe in our sort of digital world where like entire, like, anything is possible, anything can be created in like a digital space now. And it makes me think that but I experience that when I look at your work, because I think it's so like the level of detail and just the like that I experience. I mean, and I haven't actually seen most of your work up in person, which I'm so excited to go to Well and experience it. But it's just like that there is this, even in the digital space, and the way that you photograph your work and like all of that. I mean, there's just you really do sort of capture that, and that we understand like all of the just these things as physical things, and just the time and the labor and the processes, and just even like, oh God, like all of the when you were the very first piece we looked at with the spiral and like matching up all of those different sort of pieces of fabric. So it just, to me, that is what the work does for me in a really exciting way. And just thank you for making it, because it's incredible.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Great. Well, are there if there's any final burning questions from the student audience out there, please feel free to type them in the chat, and definitely check out the work up at like go and see it in person. We will go ahead and link that in the chat perhaps. just so that people like know where they can go and experience the work.
Mhm.
Any final things that anything, what should we look for next, Andrea, before we get
Well,
off?
I'm gonna be having my show in July, so I'll have a solo exhibition. It's gonna be basically all brand new work that's never been shown before, and I am really excited about some of the things that I've been doing, especially because I had tried some new things with that work for Meta Open Arts, and have been sort of bringing those things that I really enjoyed into the new work, and I'm excited to show that. So that show will be opening the first Saturday of July. I think it's July 2nd. And hopefully things are still trending in the way that they have been trending with the pandemic, and because I'd really like to have like a nice party and just have everybody come and we can celebrate, like have a good have a good time. So yeah, please do look out for that. And you can also follow me on Instagram. I have lots of in progress shots. I'm kind of posting different things in places where you can see my work. So it's just my name. So.
Great. Andrea, thank you so much for being here with us. Oh, that's weird. I don't know why.
Sorry, that was
I'm not
me.
touching it. Okay.
Open the chat and
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and taking the time. I know that the work was certainly inspiring for me, and you can see all the love that you're getting in the chat right now, that it was inspiring for others as well. For everybody, this talk will be recorded and added to our archive. So if you want to check out like other things that we've done like this, they are all right here, and it'll be up later this week. If you want to check out what else is going on at PSU and other things that are coming up, that's all right here on the events page. We welcome you to anything you'd like to attend. So again, thank you so much, Andrea. I'm going to go ahead and stop the
thank you
screen
so much.
and yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much.